going to be our challenges, where we are today and where we anticipate being at the end of this fiscal year and then going into the new year. So with that, I'm going to have Peter Gordon come up and do an update for you on it. He's obviously the man who's on the streets with all the crews and really knows what's happening with Emerald Ash Borer in our community. So, Peter?
Thanks, Mary. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. I want to begin tonight by thanking you all for your leadership, your financial support, as well as your commitment to the residents of Lake Forest in managing Emerald Ash Borer. Without your guidance and collaboration, managing Emerald Ash Borer would not have been possible. You have heard us say that EAB is very dynamic, and when I see Alderman Novitt there, I think back 4 years ago to when he lost the ash tree in his front yard, probably the first resident to lose an ash tree to Emerald Ash Borer, as well to see the street across from him lose all its ash trees in their entirety. Alderman Waldeck and I worked through the bureaucracy this year of ComEd and getting the power turned off to her neighborhood to try to get the trees safely removed in her backyard. Alderman Moore and I had worked to look at all the trees in his yard, and he actually engaged his neighbor to mitigate the loss or to mitigate the removal of trees that posed an imminent threat to his house and his family's house. Alderman Tack and I worked to negotiate property lines with his neighbor to get several ash trees down. And Alderman Palmer, early in the springtime, a piece of property behind your home, which you and I once thought was forest preserve, turned out to be a homeowners association. And so 5 aldermen, 5 different stories, a very dynamic process. And so without your support, certainly we wouldn't be where we're at today. I want to assure you, as we have committed ourselves to you in solving your problems, we've also done the same thing to our residents here. We have impacted over 770 residents this year with our Emerald Ash Borer program. 616 individual homes and more than 1,300 ash trees were tagged on the private right-of-ways, as well as an additional 154 homes were impacted for private tree removal, totaling 407 trees. Next year already, we have a list of over 551 private homes that will have to have their ash trees removed that pose an imminent health and safety threat. So with that, I'd like to kind of turn to the presentation we have here on Emerald Ash Borer. And we're going to, as we have before, discuss the 3 different levels of treatment, removal, and replacement. So EAB treatment, we have treated in all 4 wards. We have treated over 680 trees. That's a little bit different than the 1,200 we came to you before with. These are trees that predominantly make up 90% of a streetscape, and their loss would certainly be detrimental to property values, to the aesthetic of an individual neighborhood, as well as the environmental impacts that it would have. So you can see that this year we've treated over 497 trees throughout the community. We also treated in the golf course and the cemeteries, and an additional 37 private residences trees, meaning the trees on their parkway and not necessarily just along the street. As far as removals go, I mentioned to you earlier that we tagged over 1,330 city parkway trees. We are going to do about 785 of these trees in-house. You may recall we purchased a chipper recently to allow us to have 2 crews working simultaneously. Also, we have contracted out, or will be contracting out, 545 trees. I have to apologize to you. This number right here, the 95,000, in a document we provided to you earlier, there was a number of 119,000. That number was in there a little premature. As you may be aware, we're coming back to you in the council meeting for the omnibus to go ahead and spend the additional $50,000. So we have contract pending, and that's where that number came from, so I apologize. So contractually, we've taken down 407 trees to date. We're planning on taking down the total of 545 by the end of the season. And as mentioned, we have tagged over 412 private trees. Regreening is certainly an initiative of ours. We've planted 523 trees. In spring, we planted over 188. This fall, we're going to be planting over 135, and we're projected to plant another 200 trees this upcoming spring. So in summary, as far as the budget goes, where the money went that you had allocated for the Emerald Ash Borer program, we show what we've budgeted for FY14. We show our year-to-date expenditures as well as our year-end estimates and what we're proposing for 15. So 15's budget actually does come down a little. We won't be treating as many trees. We have gone ahead and switched the funding a little so that we could spend more time towards EAB removals. And we have gone ahead and reduced the amount of planting as well to $100,000. And that's a number that we feel comfortable with as far as tree replacement. It's also important to know that we have done some municipal partnering to keep our numbers down. We did go ahead and enter into a contract with Lincolnshire to provide chemical treatment at a reduced rate, and that is a 3-year contract that we're also able to offer our residents at a reduced city rate. On the bottom, you'll see that there's a $43,000 adjustment that was for the new forestry chipper, so that's why one of those numbers seems a little bit off. We heard you early in the spring about what can we do for the residents of Lake Forest. We took those comments seriously, and so we have hopefully been getting out to our residents either through the Home Health and Expo convention, our Emerald Ash Borer workshop that we hosted, our campaign of What Does Green Mean? And just recently, you may have seen we had a native tree sale at Elliwa, which was really a big success, our first ever with Lake Forest Open Lands. And we have been noted as one of the first communities to engage ComEd in ash tree reductions along the power line so that ComEd, along with the City of Lake Forest, can ensure that we have reliable service to the residents of Lake Forest. So in these 5 or 6 months, it's been really busy. Certainly, we couldn't have done it without the forestry team, and as I said earlier, your commitment to the program. And to be honest with you, the residents have certainly been engaged in this process as well. They've been understanding. It's a very passionate issue. There's financial implications, and certainly the loss of property values is the loss of landscape. So we're all in this together, and you know, I think so far it's turned out to be a successful program in its infancy. And with that, I'd certainly be happy to answer any questions you might have.
I have a question. If you have a tall ash tree and it gets infected, it'll kill the tree, but it won't affect the inside of the tree. So I would think the tree would remain structurally sound except for the limbs, which would probably weaken. Is that correct?
Actually, what we have been hearing is that trees that are infested and dead, standing for just a couple months, either break below ground or at a level about 3 feet above ground. Because the whole system is dead. Unlike an oak tree or maybe even an elm tree that could stand for years, these trees actually become very brittle, and again, that's the health and safety risk we're concerned
But I
about.
thought the inside of a tree was basically just dead wood.
Well, the inside of the tree is dead from the standpoint of it doesn't conduct anything vascularly, so it's not moving nutrients up, and so that's always the case. The problem is that the structural integrity of the wood is compromised throughout the tree, and it becomes weak and punky, almost brittle, and that's why it breaks.
Okay.
Peter, a couple of questions. What species of trees did you replant? I think you mentioned 400 and some trees replanted in parkways. What are you using that you think is resilient and long-term?
Well, Lake Forest Open Lands and the City of Lake Forest are really promoting natives. So we've gone back to kind of the tried and trues, the lindens, the oaks, the hickories, things that were here native before settlement even occurred. We have gone back as well and used things like ginkgos that are non-native but have very few insect and disease pests. And so we've really tried to diversify. At our plant sale, we introduced things like pecans and mocker nut, trees that maybe the average resident wasn't familiar with, and ironically, those are the trees that didn't sell. And so we need to do a better job of getting that information out to the residents. And as a matter of fact, like we had with our resident Emerald Ash Borer guide, we plan on doing a regreening guide this spring to really promote native tree planting.
Okay. And did you say you were going to offer chemical treatments to Lincolnshire?
Lincolnshire and the City of Lake Forest did a consortium bid, and that bid was good for not only public trees, but also carried over to private trees. It's a 3-year contract, so the two tree care companies that won the bid, True Green Chemlong and Davy, have to offer our residents the same prices as they offer the communities.
So do we call the city if we want someone to come out and treat our ash trees? or-
You'll actually call those companies, and the reason we didn't make it public this first year is because we wanted to ensure that they were on board and they could actually do the volume of the city trees in both communities. And so we'll be coming back either through the dialogue or through some other publications to let the residents know.
Yeah, that's good. You should put that on the website under the Emerald Ash.
Sure.
info.
Yep, we can do that.
Peter, have you noticed, have neighbors been kind of like banding together and in groups and getting their trees removed jointly? I know I felt bad when I had to remove my trees, and you were such a great help in contacting ComEd. I felt kind of bad for my neighbors that the power had to go off for a couple hours one morning, and that's an inconvenience to everyone. And I felt especially bad if somebody else was going to remove trees in that same grid. A couple weeks later, it would, it's hard to have the power. Conceivably, the power could just be continually,
Right.
going off in your neighborhood. Have you? I don't know if that's something that residents are aware of. That
Sure.
It would be.
I can think of one street where some residents banded together, actually two streets, to keep their costs down. They agreed on the same tree company, so it was easy to do. They were able to keep their costs down because they use the same tree company. You guys have been exposed to emerald ash borer for a while. You've heard about it, and you've seen what can happen. And so a lot of the trees that I've discussed were either in backyards, and so you guys took the initiative to do that. We haven't made it into backyards, and so it's our hope that ComEd helps us and we develop a program and figuring out what to do, that they can then tell us, hey, we've got 3 people on the circuit who want to have tree removals, let's schedule it for the same day.
That would be great if they could help
And
out
Karina
with
and
that.
I, from the Office of the City Manager, have been in talks with ComEd. We're bringing them back for a second time, just to go ahead and try to figure out what's the best approach to these situations.
Because it's difficult too, coordinating between ComEd and your tree remover, and you were a great help
Right.
to me with that, but it can be tricky.
Well, and for you, we just wanted to see how the process works. I mean, so we called the same number that the residents would call. We wanted to hear what they had to say so that we could go ahead and pass that information on to our residents.
And Peter, just a couple questions, and it's more informational. We've been dealing with emerald ash borer now for 4 or 5 years, and initially, when I had my dilemma with my tree, the chemical treatments were kind of iffy. Are they becoming a little more effective, and maybe are the prices dropping a little bit more? Sure. So they're actually improving where they're a viable alternative?
So when we originally approached you, there was a number of chemicals that were available, and we found through our own studies, through our own grants, that Triage is the most effective product. It seems to be the most effective product across the country in independent test results. Those numbers have come down when we've done consortium pricing. But when individual homeowners call, those ranges do vary based on overhead and each company's availability. So we would encourage residents to take advantage of this program where we can guarantee prices in the $6 and $7 range per inch as opposed to the $14 range.
Okay, so it is becoming better
Yeah.
with time. And just a general question, as far as the infestation, first we were looking for this wave where it was taking over. Is it relenting a little now with the trees being thinned down, or is it?
It's not. As a matter of fact, you guys will probably see the worst of it in the next 2 to 3 years. And so residents are becoming more aware of it. You may be seeing more green ribbons around town. You may be seeing our signs about emerald ash borer removal taking place. We've tagged 1,330 trees. We've got over 4,000 parkway trees. That doesn't include our other ancillary properties where we've identified over 2,000 ash trees. And so this is going to take a little bit of time, and I think the highest infestation levels will be over the next couple of years.
Okay, so if you're a member of the public and you're not committed to chemical treatment, this isn't something you could outlive or outwait. It's something that's inevitable.
Unfortunately not. And so long term, we'll see a reduction in ash trees, which leads to a reduction of the emerald ash borer population. But that's just because they've consumed all the ash trees in the community.
Okay. One other just general question. With the $100,000 that's budgeted next year, knowing this year with $200,000, a certain amount went to the chipper, which is a necessary evil. do we have enough budgeted at this point to keep pace? Or is it a question?
You know, that's a really good question. So to answer your question, we don't necessarily have enough money to keep pace with tree for tree removal. We have just the right amount of money that we can effectively maintain what we plant.
Okay,
And so we can maintain and water that amount of trees based on those dollar amounts. When we start, even if you were to give us $300,000, we couldn't effectively, or nor do we have the equipment to maintain the health of those trees. So I would say that that $100,000 number is a good number. It may put us back a little further in some situations, but I think in the long run, we'll have a healthy urban forest because of it.
and, principal concern for all involved is, as Bob mentioned with the trees, you can't maintain them, they become very brittle. I just want to make sure there's no public safety element that people are at risk.
Right, and that's why we bumped up the removal to 200 instead of 150 and the planting down to 100, because we thought that money would be better allocated towards the removals to mitigate those hazards first, and then kind of worry about the planting secondary.
Okay. No, thank you.
Yeah, and I can show you that budget slide again, if you'd like. Otherwise, that's kind of our thought, is we would put a little bit more money towards the removal in the upcoming year and a little less towards planting.
Yeah, it's a balance, and I'm sure you'll be reporting back.
I'm sure.
Now, unless there's any other questions at this point, Peter, thank you.
Thank you.
And it's something we'll be closely monitoring.
Am I on what we have on the omnibus tonight?
I do.
Oh, okay.
Anything else, Mary, or?
I just wanted to make sure council was aware that tonight on the omnibus, we were asking for the remaining $50,000 of this fiscal year in order to keep pace, kind of to your question, Kent, that we have removals that we want to make sure we do get out of there, and we'd like to use the remaining funds, so, thanks.
No. Okay, nothing else said. We'll go on to the fourth item on the agenda, which would be overview of the revenue options to be considered at the November 18th, 2013 budget meeting, which is actually coming up for our next regular meeting. Elizabeth? And I'm sure this is kind of a warm-up for the November 18th meeting.
Exactly. Good evening. Recognizing we have a lot of material to present at the November 18th meeting, we thought it would be helpful just to give you a preview to a portion of the agenda. Typically at the November budget meeting, an emphasis of the agenda is on capital. We will be presenting and discussing quite a bit related to the capital budget and the 5-year financial forecast related to the capital funds of the city. But also on the agenda, there's going to be considerable time spent discussing some of the revenue options that have been introduced and discussed at the September and October Finance Committee meetings. So we thought we would just highlight some of those again this evening, just to give you a preview again of what's going to be on the November 18th agenda. And just for the public, that begins at 4 o'clock on November 18th. That's a work session and starts a little bit earlier for that budget discussion. As we've discussed at both the September and October Finance Committee meetings, some of the key issues that we're intending to address with some of the revenue options for consideration are a projected operating budget deficit in the general fund, currently projected to occur in fiscal year 17, primarily due to expenditure growth outpacing revenue growth, shortfalls in capital funding in our primarily our capital improvement fund and water and sewer utility fund, strategic plan objectives outlined in the strategic plan adopted by the City Council last year, a key priority of the City Council to ensure that we maintain a well-balanced revenue structure within the city, and a potential loss of revenue from the state. We had considerable discussion in October about the fact that the city is currently projected to receive $2.3 million in fiscal year 14. $1.8 million of that $2.3 million goes directly into the general fund operating budget. $500,000 of that is motor fuel tax revenues and funds capital improvements. But as the state begins to grapple with their own fiscal issues and has considered reductions of income tax, specifically revenue distributions to municipalities in the past, there is a concern about the reliability of those revenue sources into the future. So one of the first revenue options that the City Council will consider on November 18th is property taxes. We've talked about that both in September and October. This chart is the one we looked at October 21st. And as discussed, the City Council could elect to increase property taxes to begin to offset some of those state revenues. This is the example we looked at October 21st that began taking a portion of that $2.3 million, adding that to the property tax levy, putting that in the general fund, and then each year beginning to phase some of that revenue in the general fund out, transferring it over to the capital fund, and phasing that revenue out of the general fund budget. We talked about the projected impact on an average homeowner being about $65 on an $800,000 home in 2014. On the left bar, you can see the projected schedule for the 2013 levy. This evening on your omnibus agenda is a tax levy estimate. The tax levy estimate on the omnibus agenda is this one that you see here. The tax levy estimate this evening simply meets an administrative requirement in Illinois state statutes. It's a non-binding action. The purpose primarily is for the City Council to approve an estimate to determine whether or not the overall increase exceeds 5% over the extended levy from the prior year, to determine whether or not a public notice and public hearing will be required under truth and taxation. So that tax levy estimate is on the agenda this evening, and again is non-binding. The key actions by the City Council are on November 18th and December 2nd, which will be the first reading and second and final reading of the actual tax levy ordinance. So those will be on the following two City Council agendas. On October 21st, there was some discussion by the City Council of waiting for state action and seeing whether or not the city could add the property taxes in more of a reactive process and simply add the $2.3 million or whatever the loss of revenue is when the state actually takes action. So just for informational purposes, I took the same schedule that you saw on the previous slide and plugged the $2.3 million in to just show what the impact would be, assuming the city lost the entire $2.3 million in a single year. And so using this year's tax levy estimate, that would result in an 11.25% total increase in the levy to make up that full $2.3 million in a single year, so that you can just see what the 1 year impact would be. That will vary from year to year because a lot of it depends on what the tax cap limit is in a given year. That can range anywhere between 0 and 5%. This year it's 1.7%. And so if that is closer to 0%, the overall increase would be lower. If it was closer to 5%, it would be higher. But it gives you an approximate estimate of what that total impact would be in a single year. The next revenue option for consideration and discussion on November 18th relates to sanitation or refuse collection. Over the last several months, the Public Works Department has been presenting to the City Council results of a sanitation study and presenting various options related to that study and analysis of refuse collection services by the city. At its October meeting, the Public Works Committee recommended approval of a fee associated with refuse collection of $1 per pickup for collection of refuse. So that $1 per pickup would result in an $8 fee per month And it's proposed that that fee would be assessed on the water bill because that would be the least administrative burden on the city. It would be the easiest way to assess that fee. And so it would be a quarterly charge of $24 applied to the quarterly water bill on a household. And that would generate annual revenue of $620,000. So that Public Works Committee recommendation will be presented and submitted November 18th for consideration. The next is the water rate. We received some very good feedback from the Finance Committee on October 21st related to restructuring of the city's water rate. The city staff are continuing to explore options based on the feedback that we received. On November 18th, the staff will be presenting both a revenue neutral option as well as one that would provide additional revenue for capital funding in the Water and Sanitary Sewer Utility Fund. It is anticipated based on October 21st input that the new structure would include a fixed rate that would cover defined fixed costs, a variable rate that would cover moderate usage, and a tiered higher usage rate that would incentivize conservation and would affect more of those higher usage consumers in high production, high consumption times, especially during the summer. We're currently analyzing system-wide data to do some benchmarking to assist us in the rate setting. So we'll be able to provide that data on November 18th. As part of the city's annual budget process, we do citywide a review of our entire annual fee ordinance, and departments do submit adjustments to fees for potential revisions. Some of these significant ones that will be recommended on November 18th is eliminating the $5 online vehicle sticker discount. That was originally implemented when we first started online vehicle sticker sales to incentivize people to do that. We've accomplished that goal. We have about a 78% online sales rate. We offer that discount in addition to absorbing the credit card fees that are assessed on those transactions, so it's kind of a double discount. So we're proposing eliminating the $5 discount, but continuing to absorb the credit card transaction fees. Also included will be the annual adjustments of parks, recreation, and golf course fees. Also a recommendation to clarify and simplify the building permit fee schedule. And then you'll see other incidental changes included in that fee ordinance. The schedule related to fees is that November 18th Finance Committee at the budget meeting at 4 o'clock will be in a discussion of the proposals. At the November 18th City Council, there will be a first reading of the ordinances associated with fees. And December 2nd City Council meeting, the second reading and final approval of the fees. The only exception to that is that we don't currently anticipate the water rate to be approved on that schedule. We will probably have the water rate approved at the 2 meetings in January. And that is the preview. Any questions or comments before?
Do we have a contingency plan right now if the state pulls out the rug from under us?
Well, that is certainly what fund balance reserves are for. I think that we know for now that there is no proposal through their current fiscal year, which is through June 30th of next year. So next summer, they'll be back approving their fiscal year 15 budget. When they adopt that next summer, then, we kind of know each summer what will happen for that fiscal year. But
I think Alderman Palmer, very candidly, it's partly why we have the reserves that we have. And you might recall that we just went up to 25% of operating revenues a year and a half ago because of the volatility at the state. But I think then the other component of that plan is exactly the conversation we're having right now. How do we fill the gap or are there services out there that we would discontinue to bring our expenses in line with available revenues?
Yeah, I think my question is, once the state indicates it's going to do it and leaves us scrambling, whether or not we've passed tax increases or not, I assume we have a contingency plan so that our employees get paid. I mean, economic triage or something. And we're not going to shut the city down if that happens.
That is correct.
Okay.
With respect to the online discount that you want to forego, the state of Illinois, for example, when you renew your license plate annually, they actually charge you a service fee.
Correct.
And that service fee they charge you probably is offset in part by taking your credit card statement. Other vendors charge you a service fee if you use a credit card, but if you use an auto debit to your bank account, they don't charge you that. I don't know if we're set up to do direct debits to people's checking accounts, but that would save us the credit card charges that are inherent with paying for those renewal fees.
Elizabeth? When are we scheduled to discuss expense reduction opportunities?
Well, central dispatching is going to come back. That's the key.
Yeah, we had a meeting, losing track, last Monday, I think it was, and the task force next meeting is December 2nd, which is probably too close to the December meeting, so we will probably have a report back in January, one of the 2 council meetings in January, on any recommendation from the task force on central dispatching. We do have a couple of other ones that are in the works as well, but you'll see them probably wrapped up in the March budget meetings that we have there. Typically, what we do in our budget process is we identify what the revenues are that we have to work with, and then we back the expenses into the available revenues. And then, as if you look back on the budget process, we identified 4 or 5 studies like the central dispatch that we were doing this year that, depending on when they get completed, we roll them out to the council. But any of those decisions then would be factored into our FY15 budget calculations for next year.
It just seems to me that you scrub the expenses, and where you can't make it all up, you do the revenues. It just seems like we're doing it in reverse. And somehow when you do the revenues, you lose the crying need to cut the expenses. I guess that's a rhetorical question.
Well, it's a good question, and we've actually talked about it both ways. And I'll just say, and I'm guessing this was, 3 to 5 years ago when we made this change, there was a sense that the expenses were driving the revenues. And the feeling was that's not the way it should be. It should be, here's the money that we have to work, and we will work the expenses to that. And quite candidly, that's what's led to a number of the cuts and other modifications that we've made. Again, not because we're looking 1 year out, but some of these decisions are going to affect our budgets 2, 3, 4 years down the road. And short of, the catastrophe of the state just wiping out all the revenues, where we'll have to then take more immediate action, that we have the luxury and the revenue streams in place to be able to make business decisions today that will go into effect 12, 18 months down the road. So I hear exactly what you were saying. We argued that 5, 7 years ago, but I think there was a real feeling that that's typically how government operates, is that they say, here's how much money we need, now you got to raise taxes to meet that need. And the decision here was, no, that's not how we're going to operate. We're going to say what's reasonable expectation in terms of revenue from the residents, and then we'll work expenses to meet those those available revenues.
So, and
I'm still where I started out, but that's okay. Maybe it's just me.
Jack, in that vein, it behooves each of us to scrutinize the expense appropriations requested of us at every council meeting. And we shouldn't be bashful to do that.
Yeah, I just don't, I don't want to belabor this. I just don't, and maybe it's because I'm new and I haven't gone through all of the expense reduction that you folks did before I arrived, and you feel like you've given, and you've given a lot. So maybe I come in without that historical perspective. But for some of these things, I just don't see the passion, the expense reduction that I would expect to see.
Jack, I'm gonna jump in and tell you,
Okay.
I think you're right, and I think you're wrong. I think you're right that you haven't been here a long time to see it.
Are you practicing to be my wife?
No, I'm not, I promise.
Good, because I don't need another one.
I can tell you in the time I've been on the council, and I know Bob and Kent and Kathy and those who've been here for a while as well, I think we as a city have done an incredible job in looking for ways to reduce costs. Everything from early retirement incentive plans to joint bidding to refinancing of debt. Elizabeth has given us great guidance in that. I think I'm really proud of what we have done and what staff has done to help reduce our cost. I'll be very candid with you and tell you, and Bob and I had this discussion this evening, I'm worried that we're almost to that point where we can't do much more. And you know what you're seeing tonight and some of the things Elizabeth brought up, things like increasing the water rates, charging for garbage. I mean, those are all things that are now we're trying to figure out how we can begin to generate some revenue, because I think we've cut so much. If we begin to cut much more, I really believe the residents are going to feel it. The other thing I'm very concerned about, and again, I know we've talked about it in the past, is I believe that our city staff is worked very hard. I think we've had reductions across every department. And I believe the staff we have now is extraordinary, but those staff are, very often are doing more than one job. And I'm very concerned up and down all levels of departments, up and down all levels of staff, that we also aren't going to be able to maintain and sustain the staff levels we have and generate the work that needs to be done with the people that we've got. We're going to need more eventually. So I'm not being critical, but I would tell you, I think we've done a tremendous job of looking at cost reduction and cost allocation. And I think we're at that point where we're kind of at a fork in the road. And if we get too much more, I think the residents in our community are going to feel it. I think if we get much more as well, I think the staff's going to feel it even more. And I think it could be untenable. I really do.
Okay, I won't belabor it, yeah.
And no, I don't want to be your wife, I promise.
As long as we've confirmed that, but I'm totally fine. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Ken, any other questions going into the meeting in 2 weeks? Or comments? Elizabeth, do you want a chance to say anything more?
No?
Yeah, we'll let you rest up for 2 weeks.
No, the only thing I would say is that we heard the council, I think it was last year, the year before, that meeting on November 18th, it was like a fire hose of information coming at you, and that's one of the reasons why we've tried to stretch out some of these discussions about whether it's capital items or new revenue items so that you don't feel so overwhelmed. But you will get a packet here within, 7 days, and it will have a lot of information, but don't be shy about picking up the phone and calling Elizabeth or I as you're going through it before the 18th. If you have any questions, there's something missing, something you're interested in, because it still will be a lot of information. We'll hear a presentation from our consultants on the stormwater study that was just completed and is now being incorporated into our capital improvement program. So hopefully what we're really looking for is direction, that staff is moving in the right direction with respect to its major capital items, because we will then take the months of November, December, January to finalize all our specifications, all of our plans, get them out for bid, so as soon as the construction season starts, we're ready to go.
And I have a request too. There are some big line items coming up in that November 18th meeting. I think off the top of my head, IT was one of them. If you can break down into sub-components some of that stuff, because that's such a big hole, big black hole, that I don't have a lot of technical competence to comprehend unless you break it into chunks that are more digestible. In IT, I'm not sure what else. I know we spend tons of money on salt every year for the snow and stuff, and I'd like to hope and think that we don't just shoot it down on the ground because we have it and we use it sparingly, because we can save money if we do that.
Yeah, the IT, I think, I'll verify, but we actually broke that out in several line items. I think we'll resolve that issue, but I'll verify that before we send it out.
Elizabeth, one of the other things too that I think would be helpful for us is you've been very great at whatever you give us is a very conservative estimate. And I understand in your mind, excuse me, you want it to be more science than art. I might ask you to put on your more art than science hat and maybe take a look at a couple of different scenarios. Maybe if things aren't quite as bad as we think they could be or they might be. You know, I think the discussion we had a couple weeks ago was focused on, you know, where we are on the capital side, and that's part of the driver for potentially talking about an increase in tax rates. It might be interesting just to kind of go back, look at some history and say, you know, if it's this, then it's going to be that. Maybe if it gets a little better, maybe if the assumptions are not quite as conservative, then just to give us a little bit of a range. Again, we're not going to hold you to it, certainly, because it's out of your control, but it might be good to see kind of some brackets as well.
Sure.
And because we have time to fill, at least we'll make a positive comment. As a city, you know, truly, as I watch the management that we have of our finances, it's very positive. And I truly see a lot of positive things on the horizon, maybe potential for sales tax input or large amounts coming into the city. So there's hope on the horizon. It's just the state is the variable. It's a wild card. We seem to be marching through the recession at this point. But again, the state with its troubles, it kind of whips back at us. And our health could suddenly turn very quickly from something we have absolutely no control of. So again, I think we do have to stay ahead of it. I think at this point, we can't really cut much more in answer to Jack, and I'll agree with Don wholeheartedly, in that if we cut back the services that are provided to our citizens, it's going to be felt, and it's going to be very noticeable. And I don't think there's going to be a lot of people horribly happy with the changes or cutbacks I see. But we're almost there, and if the state would just remain constant, we'd be okay, but who knows? And that's kind of the wild card. I want to say no to increased expenses. I want to say no to tax increases, but it's that wild card that could really get us, and we don't want to be caught by surprise. We don't want to be caught short. Okay, you don't have to put up with me now.
Well, I think it's an excellent point to make, Alderman Novit, and I think we'll have a lot more conversation both at the November 18th meeting and as well as going forward, because, you know, since the newspaper article was out there, I've received a couple of emails, I think some of you have, from residents and so forth, and they say, well, you know, why do you need to raise taxes if Whole Foods is coming in? And it's sort of like, well, wait a minute, they haven't even been before the Plan Commission yet. And we got to be careful that we're not, you know, starting to project that certain developments are going to raise certain revenues. Later on the agenda tonight, we have Laurel Avenue, and I think everybody sees that developing, but whether that happens in 3, 5, or 15 years, we won't know until we get into it. So I think it's going to be critical that as we go forward here over the next 6 to 9 months, that we're balancing both what are the challenging decisions that the council has on both the revenue side and on the expense side, and what are those trade-offs and what are we willing to accept? Because it's easy to sit here right now and say we're not going to raise taxes because we're going to have A and B happen. Well then, are you committing tonight that A and B are going to happen? Well no, we'll wait until that comes before the council, and you got to be careful that all of a sudden none of these things come together and then you are in that kind of a critical financial situation.
Exactly. Any other comments? We have some time.
Can I change subjects? I've got a couple questions for Mary Van Arsdale real quick.
Depends on what you're going to ask. No, of course.
Mary,
Yes.
I notice I'm playing soccer over at Town Line Road, so the thought came to mind, we appropriated about mid-5 figures to drill that grass over there, the turf, and put in some sort of water absorption system. And then we did the median this year, low six figures. Those two projects, how have they proved out? The athletic fields first and then the median?
The athletic fields have been really good. We've continued to see the turf thicken there. It's been holding up really well, and we've had a high volume of use throughout the week. We're programming it 6 days a week right now with athletics, a couple different kinds of sports too. So it is holding up really well. So I think that is, continued to be a good direction that we went. We'll continue to amend it because we do want to continue to grow the roots, even further. And we're kind of assessing again, making sure that each time we have different kinds of storms out there, we're looking at it. So it's gone very well.
The standing water we used to get in heavy rains is no longer a big problem?
No, we really have, it's gradually gotten better and better as we've continued to, add the amenities to absorb that and increase that turf volume. So it's gone really well. We've had no, that I'm aware of, I could check, but I'm not aware of any dates that we had to not use the fields this year. So it's been a very positive change for us.
And the Route 60 median success?
It's going very well. Everything, we did have a few trees that got stressed during the hard part of the summer, but we were able to replace them and that's pretty typical, 5 to 10% die off after a first planting. But right now, everything's looking really good. The turf is holding up really well. Staff are currently looking at what our options are for this winter to do some protective measures out there, whether that's something similar to like a silt fence, protective fence along that area a little bit, or whether or not we want to cover with some mulch certain kinds of plants to help us get through the winter most appropriately. So we're currently assessing that right now, but overall, I think it's gone well. I think the one area that we still have some additional work to do is the embankment as you go to the underpass, to that north side. Still didn't come in as well as we would like. It is a very steep slope there. Of course, the time we got to point of planting that was also when we had that intense heat. So again, timing is everything. So we're going to continue to work on that. The good news is, we have talked with the Academy, and once that is grown in, they've expressed interest in helping us maintain that as part of their property continuation. So it'll be a seamless look along there. So I think that's the one area in the spring that will really put some additional focus there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. And we have maybe about 5 or so minutes. I'm trying to think if there's any item from the council meeting that we might be able to have discussion on.
Yeah, I know majority of the items, I think, are on the omnibus agenda, but we're certainly happy to answer any questions on anything that's on the agenda.
Yeah, and any thoughts? I was thinking maybe the capital equipment, maybe we could have discussion on. I don't know if Mike's ready to do that.
He's always ready to talk about capital equipment.
He's like a cat.
That's right.
But yeah, Mike, if you'd want to.
Sure, thank you, good evening. This evening, staff is requesting City Council approval for early purchase of a few items on our FY15 capital equipment list. Primarily 2 vehicles for our police department and 1 for our street section. The base reason for these is their availability. The police vehicles, the Tahoes, GM is no longer making. They're switching to a different model year. The state bid vendor has gone and purchased a handful of them and has 17 remaining. Actually, as of today, they have 15 remaining. And we would like the 2 cars that are scheduled to be replaced next fiscal year to be replaced with these 2 vehicles. The Tahoes will run an extra 50,000 miles, so we'll run them for 4 years compared to 3. We'll probably average out closer to 4.5. And those vehicles would not be put into service until the 2 squads reach their 100,000 mile mark. The second item, or the second set, is a machine that we use to heat up asphalt for the pothole repair program that we kick off right after the winter months. The unit we have right now is rotted not only on the inside and the outside, but it's not retaining its heat, and as a result, it's become an extremely ineffective machine. The company that we'd like to purchase it from has approximately about a 4-month backup with orders, and we typically, as I noted, we'll begin using this late February, early March. So that's the second item on the list that we're requesting City Council approval to purchase. The purchases actually will be made, if City Council approves it, via some savings we have in this current fiscal year's Capital Improvement Program, Fund 311. And then we'll obviously take them off the list for next fiscal year. So,
And any
Any
questions to
questions?
Mike?
The asphalt machine,
yep, yes.
is there any residual trade-in value they might give us for that? Because maybe they can recondition it at the factory and sell it to somebody who's
They gave us
reconditioned.
$1,000 for it. The
How
quote
much?
was $1,000. The quote, their question was, will it make it back to Michigan? And I said, it'll barely make it back to Michigan. So the offer was $1,000. So the net price of, I believe, $28,500. It's $29,500 minus the $1,000.
So we're getting something for
We're
it.
getting something, yes.
Okay.
Scraps,
We-
probably end up being scrap steel is my guess.
We have gotten about 17 years worth of use out of it, though.
Correct, and we only have one machine for that operation.
Okay, and obviously for the patching, it's something we do need to be ready for, and getting the order now, I think would be something that everyone would benefit from. There had been some discussion at the Public Works meeting about the Tahoes, about the percentage of the police department's vehicle, God, I can't think of the word for it, but the number of vehicles that are composed of Tahoes versus sedans. This would put us at about the 50%
Correct.
level.
Correct. We-
And then the Impalas are no longer going to be manufactured, I think, in 2014. So it solves a short-term solution.
But I think there's
It does.
still, and you probably know what I'm going to say because we talked about this at the Public Works meeting. I think that there's still a need for a sedan type vehicle that it's, and the chief could probably speak to this better than I, but I still think there's certain types of police work that are best handled by a sedan. So that's my first comment. And my second comment is just, I understand why the Tahoes are popular. I understand why police officers like them. They're bigger, they're macho cars, whatever. I have an SUV, I love it. But I do think we have to be mindful of, other issues as well. And they're gas guzzlers, they're, I think that, when we're looking at saving costs, everywhere, that we have to be mindful of it. And I think we should, if we approve this, that we should say, that's enough Tahoes for now, that if we have half our fleet, or I think this might even make more than half our fleet SUVs, then maybe we should think about putting a cap on that.
Sure.
That's just my thought.
But
Only thing is, the cost matrix here shows it coming in at 20 cents a mile versus 23 cents a mile. And you do sit higher in them, and I think that that's an important visibility issue for our officers on this.
I'm sure they're better for some things.
Yeah.
They probably handle the snow better and the sleep better. They're not better for chasing people if you happen to have to do that. They're not going to perform better in a high-speed chase. They're probably not better for, sitting in the bushes waiting for speeders to come by to, issue traffic tickets or whatever. I don't know. And maybe the chief would say otherwise, but I think the sedans still have value. For
No,
police
Alderman
work.
Waldeck, we heard you loud and clear at the Public Works Committee, and I've had a conversation with the chief, and I think he would agree with you that there are situations, and we're not interested in having an entire fleet of SUVs or Tahoes, but we are committed to coming back to you next year as a part of the equipment replacement program and give you a sort of a long-term strategic look of where we think that breakdown, maybe 50% is the right number, it may even be less than that. And I think part of the evaluation process is we don't really have a good alternative sedan out there right now, but this gives us another 9 to 12 months to look at them. So,
any other questions or comments on this topic?
I just have visions of the Dukes of Hazzard in your high-speed car chase.
Approval?
Excuse me?
Can I move for approval?
Do that on the council agenda.
Yeah.
Okay, oh, fine, okay.
Not yet, but I appreciate the thought. Moving on to next thought would be opportunity for public comment. And again, opportunity for any comments for items that have been on our agenda. And there being none, there being some at this point. And this would not be on the city council meeting that's coming up, but merely that would reflect on what's been on the agenda for the Public Works meeting. Mr. Pasquesi, is it something for council or Public Works? I'll take a chance.
I got a little bit for both of you. Number one, I was asked by a committee.
And I'm sorry to say this, would you please state your full name and address for the record?
Robert Pasquesi, 172 Washington Road, Lake Forest.
Thank you.
I'm here about this, I saw in the paper about raising the taxes. Okay, this is all well and good. I mean, that has to be done, I suppose. But I'm here to find out why the college doesn't pay what we do. I don't understand this. And they've got houses out in our neighborhood where they don't pay taxes on it. And I have to get a raise on my taxes? What kind of fairness do we have here? Now, if you dug up that building that's going to come up, they're going to take the taxes off the tax roll, right?
And you're talking about the house on
The one on Walden.
Ringwood and Walden.
That's going to open up for all these other big houses. And those taxes are going to go away, and you're going to ask me to pay for them? To replace it? I don't get this.
Yeah, and again, commenting, that's a matter, it's currently being determined by the zoning board. No decisions have made yet, so it's not really presently in front of council. But when we consider it, certainly one of the elements we're going to consider is the cost to the city.
I don't think there should even be a question about it. It's wrong. You shouldn't do that.
And at this point, I can't agree or
No,
disagree.
I'm not taking with you personally. I'm taking the whole thing as this subject is, this is crazy. And nobody makes a decision that is yes or no.
But that will be one of the considerations we have if it comes before the council. And again, it's not in front of us yet. It might not come before us, depending on approval or disapproval from zoning.
Another thing, staff makes all the decisions for what we're going to get, right? Okay. I make a little decision of this. Every staff decision costs me money. So every staff decision they make, can we take it away from their income? I think, I don't think it'll work. Okay.
No, appreciate it. One other indication for public comment, and again, if it's on an item that was on the Public Works agenda.
It is on a topic that Mr. Pasquesi just mentioned, and I have 2 minutes of comment.
Come on up. Why not?
If we could, certainly.
Thank you.
We would ask you to keep it at 2 minutes since we are at 7:30, sir.
The timing. Richard Slayton, 325 Meadow Lake Lane in Conway Farms, Lake Forest.
Thank you.
As Mr. Pasquesi mentioned, I did read that the city council was considering raising property tax to cover the $2 million shortfall from the state of Illinois that you may not get. And while that's all well and good, I went back and found that my own property taxes have increased by 10.3%, and yet the evaluation is 21.3% lower than it was in 2009. Also, I went in to the compensation levels for the city of Lake Forest and for the teachers here. And as far as the city of Lake Forest, I'd like you to consider looking at the compensation levels and looking at the 24% increase since 2009, which is 3 years, in total compensation for your city manager. And I'm not criticizing or commenting on his capability, which I understand is quite good. I read all of your bios, and, you know, you have a wonderful brain trust here. But looking at having him earn $226,000 in total comp and benefits, which is the 6th in the top 10 of the city managers in Illinois, and receiving more than Rahm Emanuel as mayor of Chicago. The superintendent of schools, we know, receiving a pension of $19,250 a month. That's all water over the dam. My message to you is, look at other places in the operation of Lake Forest before you, in fact, impose an increase in property taxes, which, in fact, really hurts seniors. And I'm 76 years old. You know, I don't have a pension. My wife and I live on what I can earn from earned income from investments. And that is my appeal. Thank you.
Well said. Thanks. And any other comments from public at this point? And there being none, at this point, I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Motion carries. Meeting adjourned. Let's reconvene in 5 minutes.
5 minutes, 7:38.
Okay, Central Time. And great. Give you back the gavel.
And the thing with the pensions was really inspiring. That was